yes, this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, just to let everyone know. Yes, the War Industries Resistance Network is a coalition of groups, and we have been leading different webinars around the intersection of militarism in different issue areas. And we are leading up to next week, a week of action around tax day, military spending, and also against the war industries. In different targets will be members of Congress, the weapons manufacturer and industries themselves. We're having community and political education gatherings. So we'll be dropping that link in the chat for you to sign up and to see like where a location is going for you. But we also have a general meeting tomorrow night that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Also, we'll drop the link in the chat here. So yes, as folks are coming in, we are just having you say your name, where you're calling from, and we are going to get started here with our fabulous guests who are, first of all, I'm just honored to be facilitating this conversation with many of you who have followed. I've met Tara in person and up at line 3, but others have virtually organized with a little bit and really admire all the work that you're doing. So as the title of the webinar is Demilitarize, Decolonize, and Decarbonize, we are in the so-called United States, which was built on the genocidal colonization of Indigenous people and the slavery of Africans. Founded on a belief of white supremacy, the violence was used to steal land, lives, resources, and labor, and the legacy continues to this day. The same war industry corporations that drive our imperialism around the world are also behind the continuing exploitation of people and earth within and on our own borders. Here as abroad, the military-industrial complex is tightly connected to the ravages of the fossil fuel industry, the uranium extraction and waste cycle, and the for-profit management of military bases. Wall Street, with his quest for profits, is the engine of it all as it poisons our water and threatens the earth. This is what modern day colonization looks like: corporate theft of resources at the devastating expense of Indigenous people and Mother Earth. So we collectively say no more, and to demilitarize, decolonize, and decarbonize now. And at the end of this Zoom, I would love for us all to come off mute and say that together as we move forward here. We have 4 leaders with us today. We have Tara Houska, Leona Morgan, Mikey Ioni, and Kiani DeFranco with us, and they are all going to present with us for about 15 minutes, and then we are going to have a Q&A session after they speak. So we are going to start here. I'm just making sure. Okay. Yes. So we're going to start with Kiani DeFranco, and Kiani is a Kanoka Maioli Kiai, and I apologize if I am not pronouncing that correctly, a Native Hawaiian guardian of land and water rights, and an organizer with the Oahu Water Protectors. He leads Malamo Venture Studio, an Oahu-based organization focused on building regenerative community-based businesses at the intersection of Hawaiian culture and innovative technology. Kiani is a member of the Nation of Hawaii, assisting in their fight for sovereignty and self-determination, and was a frontline activist at Moana Kia and Standing Rock. So I will pass the computer screen on over to you.
Great, thank you so much. And will I be sharing my screen now?
Yep, you should be able to share it. Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just give me a moment here. see. Sorry, having a little bit of technical difficulty.
No, that's not a problem. I think we've all been there when it comes to Zoom, right? All living in this world. While you're getting that figured out, I'm just going to pop something in the chat. Veterans for Peace was kind enough to make a page for the new War Industry Resistors Network. And there it is right in the chat. And if you click that, you can find lots of information about this new network. So just want to leave that there as a resource and let people know that we will be sending that out along with all the other links and helpful references that we learned from our guests in a follow-up email. So don't worry about taking everything down as we go. Kiani, how's it going with the tech?
Sorry, maybe someone else should go first. I think I'm just having an issue with my browser. Sorry about that.
Okay, let me throw Olivia back up here. We've all lived in the Zoom world for a couple of years, so we're all used to it.
Yes. Mikey, or were you two both going to go in tandem? I can.
Yeah, we were kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries, no worries.
Oh, Kioni, do you have a?
Is it working?
Not yet.
No.
Let me see. Sorry, sometimes I use Brave browser and it's not super great with screen sharing. So I'm trying to get this working here.
It's all right. We can start with an.
How about this? Maybe I could try to screen from my screen, and then Kioni, when you're ready, you can just tell me to go to the next slide, and I can do that.
Cool. Yeah. Do you have that on?
That?
Yeah.
Let me try that. Okay. Yeah. Let's see if that works. Can y'all see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Can you still see the full screen? Perfect.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just gonna try. Yeah, there we go.
All right. Yeah, we go back to the first slide there. Sorry, I think we're going in the wrong direction. Okay, thank you all. Sorry so much for the difficulty there. Yeah, well, I just want to thank everyone so much for their time today. My name is Kioni DeFranco. I'm calling in here from Waimanalo, Oahu, the Pu'uhonua o Waimanalo at the nation of Hawaii. So I just want to start by honoring the Kia'i, or guardians, currently fighting to protect Iwi Kapuna burial sites in Koloa, Kauai, where a massive luxury condo complex broke ground this week. There's more than 75 significant sites there, burials, cave systems, and lava tubes that will most likely be destroyed. The bearers of Ke Kuia Po'iwa, the mother of Kamehameha, who united the kingdom of Hawaii in 1810, and her great-grandfather, Mahi o Lelo, are in this region. Their names must be said to honor them now. Next slide, please. And so this shows us a similar complex built over sacred sites nearby. We are being severed from our Pico, our connection to the earth. For me personally, this is the second known burial site that I'm genealogically connected to that has been developed on in the last 2 years. The first was Haki Pu'u on Oahu. In November of 2019, the Kuleana lands of Naholova'a, which was grubbed and graded illegally by Kualoa Ranch while I was camped at Mauna Kea. The destructive cycle of colonial settler state is vast, exhausting, and never ending. Next slide. Hawaii's strategic location in the Pacific has made it the nerve center of American imperialist ambitions and operations in the region. Today, the military has 50,000 active duty personnel and 85,000 dependents stationed in Hawaii. Together, the military population makes up 11% of Hawaii residents. Next slide, please. By comparison, the Kanaka Maoli Native Hawaiian population in Hawaii is about 250,000, or about 20% of the total state population, while representing 50% of the homeless population. The global Kanaka Maoli population is about 500,000, meaning that over half our people have already been displaced from their homeland. The median price of a home on Oahu just hit a record high of 1.2 million. Next slide. The central conflict between Native Hawaiians and the military is over the control of land, an issue that is tied to the question of sovereignty and cultural survival. Hawaii continues to exist as a sovereign nation under military occupation. The military occupies the richest and most strategic locations, including important religious sites, fishing, farming, hunting, and gathering areas, making food sovereignty a constant challenge. Next slide. 90% of our food is imported, making us particularly vulnerable to natural disasters and global events that might disrupt shipping and the food supply, such as COVID. Prior to Western contact, we supported a population of up to 1.5 million with vast regenerative agricultural systems, which were dismantled for extractive and exploitative industries such as sugar. Next slide. Hawaii is one of the most densely militarized regions under US control, with the military controlling 200,000 acres or roughly 20% of the land across the entire island chain. On Oahu, the military controls 22% of the land. Statewide, the combined armed services have 21 installations, 26 housing complexes, 8 training areas, and 19 miscellaneous bases and operating stations. Next slide. Given the current water shortages on Oahu as a result of the Navy's fuel spill at Red Hill last year, I strongly believe the military must immediately reduce its physical footprint until a long-term water strategy is implemented for Honolulu, but we will get to that later on. Next slide. The Kanaka Maoli story begins with the Kumulipo, our creation chant. Thousands of lines long, this chant shows a deep scientific understanding of the creation of the world and the biological evolution of humans. From darkness Po came light, from microbes in the ocean evolved sea life, from mammals walking onto the land came the Kanaka, humans. We understood our genealogical connection to the land, to the ocean, and to all living things, and lived harmoniously in a regenerative agricultural society. Next slide. The Polynesians left South Asia, most likely Taiwan, in 5,500 BC, traveling east through the Pacific Ocean, following the direction of shark migrations, who seasonally swam from underwater hotspot to hotspot. Next slide. They followed the direction of the sun during the day and course corrected using the stars at night. Next slide. They discovered and arrived in Hawaii in different ways between 4 to 900 AD. Next slide. Our people had a deep reverence for our Aumakua spirit guides who led us home. We understood our place in society as stewards of the land and ocean. Since time immemorial, we stood as kia'i, protectors and guardians of natural resources, land and water. Next slide. Pre-Western contact, we lived on communal land in a highly organized agricultural system with shared resources divided by region in an ahupua'a structured system of makua to makai. It was critical to keep the water flowing uninterrupted from mountain to ocean. Next slide. When diverted for agriculture, the water was always brought back to the stream. Today, our water rights are constantly challenged by corporations illegally diverting water for commercial purposes, leading to droughts in places like West Maui. Next slide. We lived in a next slide as well. We lived in a values-oriented spiritual system using myth-telling blended with science to impose the importance of conservation of natural resources. To the Kanaka, we understood that when a place was deemed sacred, such as Mauna Kea, it generally indicated that the area held life-giving natural resources such as water. We lived for thousands of years in a society that respected females and LGBTQ members of our community known as Mahu, were respected and revered for the ability to walk with their ku and hina spirits. For anyone interested in learning more about our deep respect for Mahu, please read Jamaica Osorio's new book, Remembering Our Intimacies, where she dives into the epic Hi'iaka Ikapulio Pele to dissect our God's sexual preferences, gender fluidity, and Mahu. Next slide. This is Keakealani Waihine, who lived from 1640 to 1695 and was the li'inui, or ruler of Hawaii Island, holding the highest rank on the island in her time. Next slide. 1778 was the beginning of Western contact and displacement of our people. Cook's End was on Hawaii Island in South Kona in a place called Ka'avaloa, an area that just passed a House bill reclaiming its original name, replacing a region known as Captain Cook for decades. Cook died attempting to kidnap King Kalaniʻopuʻu. It was his queen who alerted his warriors of Cook's attempted abduction. From Cook's arrival, we're just going to the census. From Cook's arrival in 1778, the population dropped from up to 1.5 million down to 40,000 Kanaka alive. In 1950, Kanaka made up 98% of the population in Hawaii. 46 years later, in 1896, that shrank to 36%. This is where we begin to see the colonial settler state emerge. Next slide. 1887 was a moment when King Kalakaua was forced at gunpoint by an armed militia of white settlers known as the Honolulu Rifles to sign a new constitution to transfer power from the monarchy to the more settler-friendly legislature. Next slide. The document also granted suffrage to foreigners, generally Americans and Europeans, by linking the right to vote with property ownership. This was known as the Bayonet Constitution. By 1919, Kanaka owned just 6% of the land, while corporations owned 74%. Next slide, please. To tell a long story quickly, after initial Western contact, Hawaii became a favored trading route between Asia and the Western world. Sugar rose as a primary export. Hawaii became independently wealthy extremely quickly. Next slide. Signing dozens of international treaties, establishing independence, sovereignty, and neutrality in the League of Nations, and establishing embassies and diplomats across the world, including in Washington, D.C., London, Paris, Berlin, as well as Japan and South Africa. Next slide, please. On July 6, 1846, the U.S. signed a formal recognition of Hawaiian independence. With rising economic opportunity came greed. Foreign plantation owners, organized and led by colonizers such as Sanford Dole of Dole Pineapples, began to plot and launch a coup over a number of years with the support of the U.S. Navy. Next slide, please. In January 1893, Queen Liliuokalani, who led a progressive constitutional monarchy, was overthrown by the United States, who landed Marines from the USS Boston without permission or request of the US government. Next slide. And took position between the Royal Palace and the government building, claiming an imminent threat to American lives and property. 24 hours after the landing of American troops, leaders of the armed coup, the Committee of Safety, comprised mostly of American settlers, led by wealthy sugar planters and businessmen, wrote a proclamation deposing the Queen and establishing a provisional government of Hawaii. Next slide. Queen Liliuokalani was arrested and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, hard labor, which was converted, next slide, was imprisoned to 5 years of hard labor, which was converted into a home arrest, first at Iolani Palace, where she was confined to a single room, and then at her residency down the street. Next slide. On July 7th, 1889, the Hawaiian Islands were illegally annexed by a unilateral joint resolution, creating the territory of Hawaii. Next slide. To date, there is no treaty of annexation. Hawaii remains a sovereign nation under military occupation. Next slide. The 1993 apology resolution by the US Congress concedes that the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom occurred with the active participation of agents and citizens of the United States, and that the Native Hawaiian people never directly relinquished to the United States their claim to their inherent sovereignty as a people over their national lands, either through the Kingdom of Hawaii or through a plebiscite or referendum. Next slide. 2008 Supreme Court ruling and the apology resolution acknowledges open disputes on land titles in Hawaii and clarifies an unfulfilled process of reconciliation with the Native Hawaiian people, which has left an opening to demand the return of ancestral land, specifically around land leases, specifically around military land leases. Next slide, please. So I want to briefly touch on 3 movements that we can point to as victories in process. I believe in the power of occupying land to force negotiations with the military and state over illegal land leases. Next slide. After the Pearl Harbor attack and the US entrance into World War II, the military imposed martial law in Hawaii and took control of Makua and the island of Kaho'olawe for live fire training. Next slide. It was meant to be temporary. In Makua Valley, local farming families were physically displaced at gunpoint from their homes and were told that they would be able to return when the war was over. In 1964, 5 years after statehood, the Army paid $1 for a 65-year lease from the state to continue training on Makua and other areas. In 1976, Walter Riddy and other members of the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana began a series of occupations on the island, risking arrest or death as they tried to stop the bombing. The PKO sued the Navy, and many years later, the bombing was ordered to stop. Next slide. In 1993, Congress voted to end all military use of Kaho'olawe and transfer the island back to the state, held in trust until the establishment of a sovereign Hawaiian governing entity. You can see there remnants of an explosion. However, today, Kaho'olawe is still littered with debris and unexploded ordnance. The water table cracked and is an ongoing project to restore the nation, restore the island. But what's really important here is that when the land was given back to the state, it was held in the trust until the establishment of a sovereign Hawaiian governing entity. Next slide, please. At Makua, 1,000-pound bombs were being dropped by jets and sea-launched rockets aimed into the heart of the valley. Next slide. Malama Makua is a nonprofit organized in the 1990s to challenge the military's continued occupation of the valley and request access for the practice of Native Hawaiian traditional and customary rights. Next slide. In 2001, courts ordered an issue barring the U.S. Army from conducting live fire training exercises. Earlier this year, legislation was introduced to return 782 acres of Makua Valley back to the state. However, the path forward has many obstacles ahead, including which entity should the federal government and state being issued land back to? Should it be the state, or should it be Kanaka-run land trusts as opposed to the legal settler state of Hawaii? Next slide. In 1987 and 1993, Bumpy Kanahele led beach occupations in Makapu'u, Oahu on former military lands, using a kuleana land claim for that region connected to Queen Kalama, the wife of Kamehameha III. The land claim and occupation were the indirect result of a legal agreement between government agencies that provided the framework for heirs to reclaim traditional family lands. Under the agreement, any land declared as surplus by government agencies could be claimed by its rightful Hawaiian heirs before being turned over to the state. In early 1987, the Coast Guard deemed approximately 40 acres in the Makapu'u area as surplus. The initial occupation led to the arrest and removal of Bumpy and his family. However, they were not deterred. A second beach occupation in Makapu'u in 1993 was successful, and the wave of energy and justice demanded following the 1993 apology bill and the proposed reconciliation process promised to the Hawaiian people, the U.S. granted Bumpy 45 acres under the same agreement as Kaho'olawe, held in trust until the creation of a sovereign Hawaiian governing entity. Next slide, please. Pu'uhonua o Waimanalo, the nation of Hawaii, exists today as sovereign land in Waimanalo, Oahu. It has a set population, a fixed land base, international relations, and a running economy in the process of launching its own digital currency. It is an example of what is possible if we commit ourselves to proclaiming our right of self-determination as a people in accordance with Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Charter, and to rejoin the world community of states as an independent and sovereign nation. Next slide. However, to take a step back, let's follow the timeline which led us to the current situation at Red Hill. In 1875, the Kingdom of Hawaii and the United States of America ratified the Treaty of Reciprocity, agreeing to duty-free shipments of products between the two countries. In 1887, the treaty was renewed and granted U.S. vessels the exclusive privilege of entering Pearl River Harbor, or Pu'uloa, and establishing a coaling and repair station. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to hand over to my comrade, Mikey.
Thank you so much, Keone. Thank you for that great history. You fit a lot into a very little amount of time. So aloha, my name's Mikey. I am a third and fourth generation Asian settler of Japanese and Korean ancestry. And I am a member and organizer with Oahu Water Protectors and the Shut Down Red Hill Mutual Aid Collective. Can everyone see my screen? All good? Okay. All right. Shut down Red Hill. I'm gonna try to go over as quickly as possible the past 6 months and 8 years of organizing as in a as condensed form as possible. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about what Red Hill is and why we need to shut it down, and where we currently are. But in order to talk about that, we have to talk about how we got here. And Keone helped to set the stage for that. But in order to really understand what's going on with Red Hill, it will help to understand what was done to Pu'uloa after the Treaty of Reciprocity, which gave the U.S. Navy, full rights to the area, right? What used to be pretty much one of the most momona, meaning like, plentiful, bountiful sites on all of the Hawaiian Islands that fed tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people through local ia, fish, like kind of fishing areas that were built by Kanaka, Lo'ikalo, dryland taro, and ava. It had what some consider to be some of the best tasting kalo on the island. And it was also considered the breadbasket of the island. But once the US Navy got their hands on it within several decades after dredging the entire coral reef to fit their weapons of war, they managed to turn what was one of the most beautiful, sustainable examples of indigenous lifeways into one of the most contaminated sites on the planet. That when the EPA actually came in the early 90s to kind of suss out dozens, literally dozens of candidates for EPA Superfund site designation, which is a designation reserved only for the most contaminated sites within the occupied United States. They had to narrow it down to 6 forms of different contamination, everything from PCBs to fuel contamination to mercury poisoning to laundry detergent poisoning. So even today, Pearl Harbor is still one of the most contaminated sites in the world. A lot of people who even live here who know about Red Hill don't know that there are over 5 million gallons of bunker fuel sitting just beneath Pearl Harbor that have leaked. Luckily, at least according to military officials, they haven't shown signs of migrating, but it could take as little as an earthquake to change that, right? The USS Arizona Memorial itself is basically World War II era wreckage that has a memorial built literally on top of it. If you look at this picture, part of the memorial is ongoing contamination of the surrounding ocean. It has been leaking half a gallon ever since World War II of a particularly toxic form of jet fuel, and it is considered one of the most popular tourist attractions in all of Hawaii. It is estimated that the USS Arizona will, unless it is addressed, continue to leak half a gallon every single day of every year, potentially for another 500 years. So this is kind of the political economy and the ideology driving what results in Red Hill, right? This genocidal, ongoing capitalist settler colonial project that not only displaces and terrorizes and oppresses Kanaka Maoli, the indigenous caretakers and ancestral relations and descendants of this land, but also to the land and water itself. And that's where we come to Red Hill, the Red Hill Bulk Fuel Storage Facility, which is built in Kapukaki, otherwise known as Red Hill. It was built during 1940 to 1943. It was considered an engineering marvel because it used the force of gravity to transport millions of gallons of fuel down from Kapukaki to Pu'uloa, Pearl Harbor, to fuel their ships and their planes. it contains 20 single-lined tanks that each have a carrying capacity of about 12.5 million gallons, and that totals a maximum capacity of up to 250 million gallons of toxic boat fuel and jet fuel and boat diesel. And they have been leaking ever since they were built. In fact, in the 1970s, Senator Daniel Inouye wrote an op-ed, even though Red Hill's existence was still technically classified during this period, saying that we need to make a huge spend to completely renovate and repair these dilapidated, deteriorating Red Hill fuel tanks. So that's how long they've been leaking, at least to our own public knowledge. And their existence wasn't even declassified until the mid-90s. But once we knew about it, they couldn't hide the fact that it's been leaking ever since, that it leaks thousands of gallons every year. And the first high-profile leak was in Tank 5 in 2014, in the amount of 27,000 gallons of jet fuel that they could not account for. A whistleblower said that it might even be up to 40,000 gallons. And this whistleblower also said that they literally ignored alarms as they were refilling Tank 5 because they had literally just had it repaired. And they ignored those alarms because they thought there was no possible way that this tank could be leaking. We have just repaired it. And they ignored alarms that were going off, literal alarms, while tens of thousands of gallons were leaking. So while there was what is called an administrative order of consent to prevent anything like this from happening again, there were no teeth to that administrative order. And there was very little accountability from our elected misrepresentatives because they are all the ones who have the most power, 201 of them completely in the pockets of military defense contractors, war profiteers, who have just as much blood on their hands here as they do in the global South, where US imperialist wars of aggression and capture and dispossession and exploitation and extraction continue to this day. But anyway, in late November, during Thanksgiving weekend, thousands of people fell ill. Many people had attributed it to food poisoning, but there had been earlier reports of smelling fuel in the air. There were literal 911 calls where people report to the fire department that the air in their neighborhood smelled like a gas station. Sure enough, it became clear that somewhere around November 20th, up to possibly even more than 19,000 gallons of JP5 jet fuel leaked into a fire suppression line that eventually migrated into the Navy's water system that provides water to up to 93,000 people on the island, who to this day still don't have access to clean water. Some of the early tests were bringing up as much as 350 times the safe limit of TPHD, total petroleum hydrocarbons, in water tests. This is water that people were drinking. This is water that children were drinking. This is water that babies were drinking and being bathed in. Babies were covered in rashes, crying all day, suffering from diarrhea, vomiting, rashes, severe pain. Pets died. Children and adults continue to have health symptoms, intense symptoms that, for all we know, while we hope this isn't the case, could be lifelong. There has been no accountability with regard to the health effects of this, but we can get to that at a later point. But I want to spend the rest of this time to talk about the organizing that we, Keone and I, and so many other amazing folks in this hui that formed late last year did to address this crisis and to get the results that we were able to get. It was actually, our first meeting was actually, I think, in the summer, because we were pushing to try to get, more eyes and ears on a contested case hearing and a Navy whistleblower who had basically learned about some of the structural failures of Red Hill and about a leak that the Navy did not disclose in the Department of Health case hearing for their underground storage tank permit hearing. They did not disclose it because in these leaked emails, one of the higher ups noted that they were worried about how the anti-Red Hill crowd would use this information during this crucial period in which they were applying for a tank permit. So we were filming and organizing around this very issue about trying, as many had been since 2014 and some even before, Kanaka Maoli in particular, and anti-war and peace activists in particular, ever since 2014, when the first 27,000 gallon public leak occurred. And so as early as 2014 and throughout 2014 through 2021, people have been organizing around attempting to get Red Hill shut down. And they were ignored by legislators, by senators, congressmen, by influential business entities, the capitalist-friendly Hawaii Chamber of Commerce, who lobbied directly against Sierra Club and Hawaii Peace and Justice and other land and water protectors to prevent any meaningful legislation around Red Hill from passing in city council and in the legislature, the state legislature, because they too represent the interests of the ruling class and the private defense contractors and war profiteers. But out of this hui of organizers, hia'i, members of Hawaii Peace and Justice and Sierra Club of Hawaii who have been organizing around this for nearly a decade, Ko'ohewai, Kalahui Hawaii, and what is now a new organization called the Shut Down Red Hill Mutual Aid Collective. Members from all of these huis organized into Oahu Water Protectors. And not all of these members are members of Oahu Water Protectors, but there are members from every one of these organizations and coalitions who are part of it. And one of the first things we did was on December 10th, in this center picture you see here, we organized a die-in and rise up action. And this was right when the test results of, the 350 times the safe limit of TPHD were detected. It was also just an hour before the Board of Water Supply, the only good government agency throughout this entire crisis, who has been on top of this, shut down their Halava and Waiava shafts out of an abundance of caution. This was one of our first direct actions that demanded the change that we had not seen. At this direct action, which involved political theater and mobilizing and organizing the public, we made a promise that we were no longer asking the US Navy to shut down Red Hill, we were going to make them. And in the intervening months leading up to the present day, we have done everything we could to make good on that promise. Sorry. So among the many things that we did to get to where we are today, organizing, mobilizing, agitating, and activating. We engage in direct action, political street theater like the Die-In and Rise Up action. We did a lot of street canvassing, knocking on doors and going to small businesses who were friendly to our cause, asking them if they could post our Shut Down Red Hill posters in their storefront windows and to hand out pamphlets on their tables. We also have done tabling in a bunch of different organizations, home bases, and in public farmers markets, in other community events, and at other friendly businesses. We have taken legal and legislative routes through advocacy, through trying to pass resolutions and bills, and to also form public pressure to push these unaccountable legislators to succumb to our public pressure. Organizations like Waiole Alliance and Sierra Club have been really aggressive and effective, and Earth Justice around the legal arena of pushing every possible boundary of every legal violation and trying to fence the US military in through that route. We, just like on Mauna Kea, we formed an independent media collective and produced a lot of independent media because we can't rely on the capitalist settler-owned media to tell this story honestly and comprehensively, even though there were some news outlets that did. We also were very aggressive on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, and hopefully soon TikTok, to get the word out and to build upon existing international solidarity networks, including some of the people in this chat, like Olivia and Tara. Tara and Olivia were amongst the first people to help signal boost our efforts and this cause, and very incredibly, words cannot express how grateful we are to y'all for that. And there was a lot of protesting, sign waving, political education for schools, organizations, and businesses, pamphlets, posters, merchandise, banner distribution, mutual aid, organizing with affected community members, passing neighborhood board resolutions, organizing community through neighborhood boards, and good old-fashioned cyberbullying and bird dogging of senators who are in the pocket of the defense industry here. So, sorry, this is kind of lagging. Let's see.
Yeah, Mikey, and I just want to, this is an incredible presentation. If you could wrap it up shortly, just so we have time for our other folks.
Sorry, yes. Yeah, I'll wrap it up in less than 5 minutes, sorry. Okay, so all of this led to March 7th, where Lloyd Austin declared the shutdown of Red Hill. The Pentagon officially announced that they were going to defuel and decommission Red Hill. It was a historic victory that was a result of concerted organizing and the efforts of so many water protectors, particularly Kanaka Maoli and peace activists and anti-imperialists all around the world, not just in Hawaii. But our work is not done yet. They're giving themselves over a year to defuel, and we just don't have time for that. So we're not POW yet, still get plenty more yard for bang. And there are many ways that everyone can help. We still need to organize the masses, particularly even within our own community. There are many people who we have talked to in our canvassing efforts, in our outreach efforts, who think that this is over, that not only is the US military like completely shutting down Red Hill, but that it's already happened. So a lot of political education still needs to go on the online front and also within our own communities face to face. And we are doing this in various ways. We are engaging in international solidarity, working class solidarity. Just recently, we came to, just show support with the people, the workers at the Mililani Shopping Center Starbucks, who are trying to form the first Starbucks union ever in Hawaii. And one of them, Lisi right here, is actually a Navy veteran. And so when we got to talking about Red Hill, they wanted posters, and not only that, but they posted one in their office, in their store. And it just goes to show like how this is all the same fight, right? Like all of our movements are connected. And there's this old wobbly slogan, right? An injury to one is an injury to all. And Kanaka Maoli in particular, Indigenous people in particular, know this intimately, that land is a relative and that we are inseparable from land. And for all of us, whether we're settlers or not, we are water, right? We're all water, and we are water, and water is us, and water is life. And without water, there is no life. And if we are water, and injury to one is an injury to all, then an injury to water is an injury to all of us. And so when we call ourselves water protectors, we're not just water protectors. We are people protectors too, and everything else that water protects. So water protects us, and that's why we need to protect water. And so lastly, just on the international front, there are so many amazing people in Guahan, Okinawa, Palestine. This is just one picture from a beautiful solidarity art build that organizers in Guahan, who are going through a very similar thing. Putahi Litikean, hopefully we can reciprocate this solidarity someday, but we need more, we need this to keep going as well. And we need to show up for our comrades also in the global South in the same way that they have shown up for us, because this is how we win. Just lastly, anti-imperialist organizing. I never expected myself to be organizing with military families, families in military housing, veterans, and even some active duty folks, but that's kind of what's resulted. Keone has mentioned Makua Valley. This is Uncle Sparky right here. Auntie Lynette is one of the people taking the picture, but I asked them from Alama Makua if I could invite some of the people who were poisoned by the Red Hill fuel leaks if I felt they were ready to come experience what Makua Valley had to teach us. And they said, hell yeah, invite as many as you can. So people like Aiden Rice King and Izzy Corcoran, like they have been able to experience, not just, organizing in this anti-imperialist movement, but they've been able to experience, like Aiden is Kanaka Maoli, Izzy is a white settler who was fortunate enough to experience Makua. After just a couple weeks of organizing with Aiden, he made this beautiful post after I gave him and his family our Shutdown Red Hill t-shirts, where he called for the demilitarization of Hawaii. Izzy, in her post about Makua Valley, talked about the leases coming up in 2029 and how we need to work to stop them, and ended her post with #landback. So all of our fights are connected. We are building solidarity and bridges in places that we never thought possible. And this is all leading to the long-term goal, what we all need and what we all deserve, which is Hulihia revolution, because the future will either be eco-fascist barbarism or decolonial socialism. So mahalo, y'all. Thank you for, sorry, I went over time. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you so much to both of you for those really informative and inspiring presentations. And I think this is leading into our next speaker, Tara Houska, and someone who the very things that Mikey, you were talking about, has personally taught me so much about that, being up in so-called northern Minnesota this summer. So Tara is a citizen of the Couchouching First Nation, a tribal attorney, land defender, environmental and Indigenous rights advocate, and founder of the GNU Collective, an Indigenous women two-spirit-led frontline resistance to defend the sacred and live in balance. Tara was active in resisting the Line 3 oil pipeline, the Dakota Access Pipeline, and is heavily involved in the movement to defund fossil fuels. So Tara is going to join us in speaking, and also really thankful for her as she's, yes, there she is. I can see you right now. And so Tara, I don't think you have a presentation. If you just want to go ahead and speak from your perspective, thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Miigwech to the speakers before, and for all y'all putting this together. Appreciate the effort and bringing everyone together, and all the people that are watching and sharing space and giving open-mindedness to this discussion. It's deeply appreciated, even though we're over Zoom and all that. So Buju Ginawa Jabawe Crane does Nakaz Makwa and Didam Goching and Dinjaba. My name is Tara. I'm Bear Clan from Couchouching First Nation. I'm calling you from Anishinaabe territories. I'm an Anishinaabe person. My homeland is actually here. That's where I'm coming from today. It's blizzarding outside, and I guess in the southern part of Minnesota, it's actually tornadoes. So this is the new reality that we are watching unfold in front of us. I've been doing this work for a while now, almost a decade, of basically ever since I got out of law school. And the things that I've seen over time and where I'm at in my journey of defending the earth, having come out of this tiny place I'm calling you from. I mean, I grew up in a place of just like 200 people outside of a town of 4,000, and we are isolated. We are up here in the woods, and venturing out and learning about the world and seeing what was happening. One of the things I've really kind of like felt so strongly over time is in this work has been the really transactional nature of this work. And it's not just transactional on behalf of the folks that we're trying to advocate to, or the folks that are perpetuating colonial violence, or the folks who are so deeply entrenched in extractive ways of living. It's transactions among each other too. You know, it's hearing so many of these sad stories and being in spaces where you're sharing with other water protectors or other folks, other Indigenous peoples from around the world, and hearing of their beautiful home and their beautiful place and their sacred, and how it's being ravaged, destroyed by climate change, by active destruction, like in the Red Hell case, or, you know, I mean, Line 3 or DAPL, or burning down the rainforest in the Amazon. I mean, it's for agricultural land. It's so many different stories, and this central theme of, you know, I think so many of us being kind of like the last holdouts of these last beautiful places, and the way of life that has been largely adopted by at least westernized mainstream society, so-called westernized society, is to continue that way and to extract. And so now we're on something that they want. And it's always our reactions to it and our defense of our homelands, and sitting in rooms of decision makers, sitting in rooms of fellow advocates, and telling our stories and sharing these horrible facts and trying to present in a way that maybe reaches somebody and touches their heart. You know, why should I care about your homelands? And then trying to get wrapped up in someone's story. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like to me, it's all really the same story. You know, it is very intersectional, like was just said. You know, it is a story of the disconnection that human beings have from the earth and from each other. It's a story of what happens when we allow ourselves to be in the place that we are now, which is a very fast-paced, disconnected, and oftentimes disenfranchised, or I think really kind of like removed from what we're participating in tacitly or what we're actually actively engaging in. Theft of land, theft of labor, destruction of what's left. I know, and that's present in all aspects of the movement. I see that in the movement as well, where we're put into these kind of spaces where we're almost like, I don't know if it's always competing, but sometimes we are directly competing for, you know, the support and for the care, you know, and the ability to keep organizing, to keep doing all those things. You know, it's a hard road to follow, and I certainly have learned a lot of tactics and strategies to fight an oppressor and to fight a destroyer, you know, over the years. That big long list, you know, of direct actions and the defund campaigns and legislative pushes and regulatory interventions, legal interventions, you know, public pressure campaigns, community organizing, mutual aid to build those relationships, bringing communities together, you know, narrative and creating media and pushing as hard as you can to show people the truth, you know. I've certainly learned all that over time and seen the power of the people, you know, the power of the people to organize. And that is something that I think is really at the heart of almost all of it. You know, I think we are still in a mindset oftentimes of like looking up and thinking, okay, well, if I just will vote this way, then it'll be all right. You know, if I just vote and get out, that should be enough. But then this politician that's funded by these industries, you know, or wasn't funded when they were running, but now they are. They've suddenly changed their tune, you know, they've suddenly become part of this system. Well, I mean, it's that same story again and again, or they start compromising, you know, because that system, it forces compromise on real values. You know, it forces compromise at times on some things that can't be compromised. Like, you can't compromise water. Water is not, it is a living being, and it's our lifeblood. We die without it. How can you compromise the sacred? I know, but yet it becomes a natural resource. It gets categorized and weighed and measured. And that's oftentimes how our campaigns feel too. And I can rattle off so many statistics about Line 3, about DAPL, about Keystone, about all these projects that I've been part of, you know, the resistance against over time, and the harms to the water aquifers, you know, the end part after the project is oftentimes built, no matter what the resistance is. And it plays out in the courts years later, right? We watch these, oh yeah, it turns out the tribes were right after all, but it's too late, it's already running. And the companies know that, right? They do everything they can to push until they reach that completion, and then let the cards fall where they may, and they pay some fines afterwards for destroying water aquifers and wetlands and people's drinking water, and endangering Indigenous people, Black people, brown people, at-risk people. But in all of that, you know, the things that I've gravitated towards in the last few years of seeing so many efforts and being part of so many efforts, you know, and trying to uplift as many of these, you know, fights that are happening for protection of people and protection of land. The pieces that I've gravitated so strongly towards have been decolonizing our thoughts, you know, decolonizing the way that we interact with each other. And I mean that in not a t-shirt cool slogan way, which is, you know, that's one thing. But in like a real thoughtful, mindful place, which is taking time, taking moments, and truly trying to think about our relationships to the earth and to each other. You know, what does that really mean? It's all well and good to say, oh, I went out, you know, and spent a couple weeks in the woods, or I spent a couple weeks out in the desert, or whatever, you know, and you almost compartmentalize and turn the relationship with nature into a transaction, and then go back to how things are, you know, because that's what we tell ourselves, this is the way things are. And I think that mindset and that apathy can be counteracted with empathy. You know, it can be counteracted with love and thought and real care and dedication. I've been really inspired over the last year of watching so many young people feeling like they've done all the petitions and the marches and the chants, and they see the failures of the generations before to adequately address the most basic problems, which is like life itself. You know, we're actively destroying our ability to live as a species. And it's been really inspiring to watch so many of them gravitating towards, how do I grow food? How do I live off the land? How do I reconnect? How do I care for the earth like a relative? And how do I start to see in a different way and to think in a different way? That said, those lessons are hard to really truly ingest, right? Like our minds will bring us right back to where we were, especially when we're surrounded by colonized thought everywhere. You know, we have this hard-nosed side, right? I mean, I'm a trained lawyer. I definitely know a whole different language to speak, but I mean, the language that resonates truly is the language of the earth, the language of nature, the language of really truly knowing and connecting with that. And I think one piece that's always been really shocking to me is like, so we rattle off all these statistics, right? Like that's how at least that's how the mainstream narrative of climate has been presented, is in all these statistical analysis and data points. Or like the watershed is, this many millions of gallons, billions of barrels have spilled. This many have been contaminated. This serves this many people. Everything gets broken down into numbers. You turn the sacred into a numbers game. And so one of those numbers is that Native people are 5% of the global population, holding 80% of the biodiversity that remains. Yet when it really comes down to it, the solution-making, decision-making tables, the language, the approach to the issues that are plaguing all of humankind, and the animals who are stuck with our decisions, the four-legged and the winged and the fish and everything that has to deal with the decisions that we're making, you don't see us in those places. We're like the entertainment instead. We become like the people who introduce the space. We do a land acknowledgement or something, or we give some inspiring speech. Everyone feels compelled for that time and like feels like maybe they could think just a little bit different. Maybe they could be just a little bit different, but then they go right back to those really familiar solution-making modes of, well, if we just wind turbine our way out of it, or we solar panel our way out of it, or we nuclear our way out of it, and we have to break it down into this much, and we can pass this policy, and if we just make this tweak here and this adjustment here, surely we can continue on with the way we've been living, but not actually really change. I don't know. I mean, you would think that statistic by itself, 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, that would ring a little bit stronger, with the people who are so caught up in those statistical mindsets. That maybe the people who hold that much of the Earth's biodiversity have something to share and have something to teach. And when those teachings are shared, that they are not automatically turned into exactly what a colonial education system does, which is compartmentalize it, break it down, and turn it into something that you master and that you dominate. Because that's what that learning pattern is about, right? You achieve a certain level of education, you go through the tests, and then you've mastered that subject and you get a degree at the end. That's not the teachings that are being shared. When I'm in a lodge, I know the teachings I'm learning, I'll think about them for years afterwards, and they mean different things at different points in my life. I'm never in domination of it. And there's not domination the other way either. It's a mutual based relationship. It's mutuality. Those ways of thinking in that round circular way versus thinking in a very square, hierarchical, structured way. I really do think that cultural shift is possible. And even if it's not, I think that there are people who are seeking purpose and seeking ways to engage as we know the climate science, as we know what's happening and we see it happening in front of us, and we feel this kind of like almost like sine wave of feeling inspired, feeling compelled, feeling motivated, and then also feeling this incredible depression kind of leaking or lurking right underneath. I think we're all struggling with that. But I think there's real ways to find purpose and to find empathy and care and to engage in these struggles, to use your agency, use your autonomy, use your voice, use your passion, use your heart, to care. People ask, why are you not getting arrested and doing these things? Like, what's the point? You're fighting a a giant oligarch who's bought the police, bought the government systems. Every card is stacked against you. Why the hell are you out there doing these things and chaining yourselves to equipment and risking so much, of your safety? Why would someone do something like that? Don't you ever think about how you're not going to win? I've been asked that question before many times. And to me, it's not like, yes, of course we want to win. Of course we want to push as hard as we can. Of course we want to exercise, every last lever and pull it. But it's about more than that. It's about knowing that we tried, and being a human being that did something more to be part of the web of life and to not sit on top, and to actually sit within and to be with nature and to care for nature like a relative. When you're out there being arrested, there's been so many moments where I'm looking and see, the birds watching and see the trees and hear the trees and think about, they're seeing all this play out in front of them, and they've seen this before in other ways, with other faces and other bodies, other times, with different goals. But really the goal has always been land. And the goal has always been extraction. I don't know. I think there's a lot to be said for really decolonizing our minds and what that really means and what it brings to others and what we can teach others in our circles. That there are systemic changes that we can make, and we can push for all those things, and we can look at existing policies, and you can push from the inside, you can push from the outside, you can try to burn it down. You can do so many different methods of intervention. But I think it's also really critical that we look internally too, not just externally. When we think about how do we really carry these words out? How do we carry out water is life? What does that really mean? I'm sitting here and talking to you guys from a land back project that we've been doing, and it's something that I'm really deeply honored to be part of and excited to engage with. I'm about to bring a new life into the world that's happening right now. I'm just about 9 months pregnant, so there will be a new little spirit out in the world. And I think about what her life is going to hold, and being able to be part of teaching warriors, the things that we've learned, teaching them the strategies and the tactics, but also teaching them to really be connected to the earth, to feel that connectivity, and to share that experience, that fulfillment with others. I think is a huge part of winning. Like, how do we win, right? We're always asking that as people that are engaged in these movements, how do we win? And I think that's more than a win. That's like a life goal. That is achieving something that's beyond words. When you really feel that connection. And I've seen that happen to so many people over the years who watched that spark pass between a person and the earth when they see each other as relatives. It's really, really beautiful and powerful to see. And holding on to that, feeding that, growing that. Those are things I think that are worth the time and the effort to not always try to, structurally define how do we win, but to really think about how do I win as a human being in this time that I'm walking the earth, and what can I share with others to help that process happen? How do I grow? So yeah, I think those are the words I'm going to share about decolonizing, and I appreciate all of you, and I wish you the best in your fights. Please support the front lines. Find the folks that are out there in the streets, that are out there with the people. It's really important, I think, that we think about that. Who are the folks that are really there and are taking these risks for us all, but also engaging in those beautiful relationships and building with each other. Find them and support them and love them and be part of them.
Thank you so much, Tara. And as you were speaking, multiple people messaged me saying how grateful they are that this is recorded, to go back and just re-listen to your words and your generosity with the time that you're taking here as you bring along a new life into this world. And I'll speak in I statements, but I wish the best of that journey that has brought you to now and the journey that's ahead of you. And in so many spaces that I'm in, when you were brought up here in DC, and just this past weekend, we were together in West Virginia, and your ripple effect of inspiration is just incredible. And we have so much to continue to learn and take with us. So thank you so much. I want to just let everyone know that yes, we are. It's Eastern time, 9:17, but we have another incredible speaker here. And while we love to have Q&As and make this as interactive as possible, I want to be respectful of the time of the speaker. So if you have to jump off, that's okay. But we're going to have Leona here afterwards. And then for folks who do want to stay on, you can. And Brian, maybe if you want to drop the links about next week, Tara as well, if you'd like to drop some links for us to learn more about the Land Back Project or the New Collective, you can share that in the chat, or I can share the social media if you're on your phone and that's not accessible. But we are really excited to welcome Leona Morgan to speak with us. Leona is an activist and community organizer who's been fighting nuclear colonialism since 2007. She collaborates locally, regionally, and nationally on radioactive waste issues across the nuclear field chain. Leona is a graduate student at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. Welcome, Leona.
Hi, thanks. Good evening, everyone. I do have kind of a lengthy presentation, but I think it's worth it to run through all the slides. However, I'm going to kind of go through them pretty quickly just for the sake of time. And I do appreciate everyone being here and listening. I'll start by introducing myself. Traditionally, as a Diné person, we like to share our plans to identify ourselves to our relatives and other folks out there, just also to Mother Earth and to identify and acknowledge my ancestors. So I actually live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I just would like to make a quick disclaimer that my family has been hurt by uranium. I am not living in an impacted community. I actually am quite privileged to do the work as an activist. I didn't grow up traditionally, but I do really appreciate the work of everyone who spoke here before. And so my work is a little bit different because I work on nuclear issues, and there's not a huge Indigenous movement right now. And I think that's something we want to build. And so I'm going to share my screen now. And I just want to invite other Indigenous people to contact me because I am working with a friend of mine, Jesse Deerenwater, who's up in Detroit fighting Fermi 2, which is a nuclear power plant similar to Fukushima. And we're inviting Indigenous people and our relatives of Turtle Island all over the world to join us. And we're just getting started. So you can email us at endnuclearcolonialism@gmail.com. So yeah, I have a lot of slides, a lot of maps. I'm really going to focus on uranium and the waste that is a result of the nuclear fuel chain. And so I like to use this picture to start my presentation because it's just really pretty. I mean, it's Monument Valley. It's on the Arizona Utah state line, and this is a place that's contaminated by uranium. So the work I do really started from uranium because a lot of my family, like I said, they were hurt by it. We've had deaths in my family, and I know that even though we can't prove it, cancers and these things that happen to our people, all of the health impacts we know are from what we call nuclear colonialism. So, okay, whoops. So I'm going to start by sharing this slide because there's a really current issue that I want to bring up, which is the abandoned uranium mines across the whole United States. But I'm going to come back to this at the end of my presentation. But essentially, I just want to highlight one of the groups I work with called Hall No. And so Hall No is an Indigenous led movement to bring attention to the transport of uranium from the Grand Canyon, which is situated very near the Havasupai people's homelands. So this is an action that was done in support of the Havasupai a few years ago. There was a recent court case, didn't go well for the Havasupai, so that's something that's going on. I'm going to talk about a lot of different nuclear issues and try to connect them and how we can support the different fights, because we know uranium is used for nuclear weapons, and that's just one aspect of how these things are all connected. So the people in this picture here, we're dealing with the mine that's right here. And the transport, the route that was proposed, goes through the Navajo Nation and many other Indigenous communities and would end up taking the waste to the White Mesa Mill, impacting the Ute community in this picture here. And so the reason I'm highlighting this now is because there's a very strong need to clean up abandoned uranium mines across the country. However, there's nowhere to put the waste. So right now, there's one proposal that is being put forward by a company called Energy Fuels that, well, several entities, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, General Electric, and this is all in an effort to clean up where the Church Rock uranium spill happened in 1979. So the idea is to clean up uranium from the Navajo Nation and haul it to the mill as a storage site. The mill is not making any money right now from processing uranium. So they've been processing what's called alternative feed, basically nuclear waste from all over the country and all over the world in order to stay afloat. But things are changing because of what's going on right now in the world. So I'm just going to back up and introduce kind of where my people are from. This is the Four Corners. So Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. This is an area that's already been inundated by a lot of resource colonialism. So a lot of coal mining, a lot of different types of extractive industry, and then fracking. So you can see there's a methane hotspot that was identified right over the Four Corners area, which is in a desert environment, very rural, not, you know, like LA and other places. And this is from a lot of it is from the different fossil fuels and development there. Now we're dealing with, well, not me personally, but the communities at home are dealing with these proposals for helium development, and they're opposing that. We have fracking in the east. There was a chemical fire that didn't make national news, and there's a lot of issues out there with that still. So going back to the uranium, this is a pretty clean map. Again, I'm going to come back to this later, but just to give you an idea, lots of abandoned uranium mines across the Navajo Nation. But there's a bigger threat across the West, and then in most areas where uranium is mined, it's in Indigenous communities around the world. And so what is nuclear colonialism? So basically the act of colonization has just taken a new form. So it's not outright, you know, it's not like the Indian Removal Act where it's, you know, the Wild West, as it were. It's taken this, you know, invasive, invisible form of basically radioactive destruction through, you know, contamination through mining and milling, and then also the development of weapons, and then also the testing and using those weapons. So not right now, that's, you know, having implications with what's going on in, you know, with Ukraine. And so that's very worrisome for a lot of us anti-nuclear community. And what is uranium used for? Obviously weapons, we talked about that. I'm not going to go into the treaty or anything. I wish there was some time for a Q&A. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. I don't work on the United Nations, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, but our organization, I work with several organizations, and we all support that, even though the United States may never sign it. It's a good thing, I think, for folks to advocate for locally. The other thing uranium is used for right now, which is a major issue, is nuclear energy. I'm glad Tara mentioned it because this is something that's being touted as a false solution to climate change. We know this is not carbon free. The reason they say it's carbon free, I'll get to in a minute. So again, if you can see where all of the testing occurred, the most nuclear weapons to be tested was on Western Shoshone people in the West. And so now I'm going to go more into the energy side. So if you look at this infographic, you can see it's only the energy aspect of uranium development to the nuclear power plant. This doesn't include the weapons, but you can see at every stage, there is waste that's created. And where does that waste go? Who does it impact? Indigenous peoples are often being targeted for storage of this waste and being bribed, and these things, they still happen today. I mean, it's not just, back in the 80s, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I went from the uranium mining, what we call the front end, and I'm going to go to the back end, which is the energy development. And there's a lot of ways this happened. It wasn't just, an accident. It was by design. Like we know Columbus didn't just bump into, Turtle Island. It was all by design. And a lot of it started because of the doctrine of discovery. And so the systematic ways that the United States has basically gotten a hold of our uranium and our resources, it's made it very complicated to fight now because of the various jurisdictions. We have the checkerboard area in New Mexico, and it's very complex. We have all kinds of agencies we're fighting, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and then all of the different state departments, and then of course the companies. And most of the time, we're just fighting our own relatives and communities that want the mining or economic development. So here again, we have another map of where the uranium mines were, about 15,000 across the country. There's no funding to clean them up. There's no law to clean them up. The mines that occurred before the EPA existed, they're just there, still contaminating the environment and affecting human health. On the Navajo Nation, there's some cleanup that's happening in 5-year plans. The next one would be a 10-year plan that was supposed to have started already. Right now, the big issue is that there's nowhere to put the waste. The United States is the one making most of the decisions, and the money that's being put forward is coming from settlements from companies. So it's not funded. This is not the way to do cleanup. There's no standard of cleanup across the board. It's basically mitigation, like just, containing it and burying it on site. So essentially making 523 permanent waste sites across our nation. So the map before, this is the EPA's kind of, really clean, pretty map. This one is showing a little bit more, which is done by folks doing actual work. And the blue spots, the blue squares, are the more really highly contaminated areas, because this is where the milling occurred, which is where the uranium was processed. And there's only one site that is currently licensed. It's not really processing uranium. Like I mentioned, the White Mesa Mill is owned by Energy Fuels, and they're pushing forward this notion of the price of uranium going up because of what's going on in Ukraine. And I don't think it's going to happen, but I'm going to show you a graph in a minute. So really quickly, just one proposal. There's a lot of things that people can do to take action. This one is ongoing. It has to do with the cleanup at Church Rock. There's other things going on now as well, such as the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, RECA. I don't have a slide on RECA, but if you have a chance, RECA is set to sunset this summer. And RECA is the law that gives compensation to people that were hurt by previous weapons testing and then uranium mining and other stuff. But it excluded miners after 1971, and a lot of other people that were affected, downwinders, especially from the first testing of a nuclear weapon, which was at the Trinity site. So this one is really important because if you all could just call your members in Congress now to tell them we need RICA to continue. We need RICA to continue and be expanded and fully funded. I can put that in the chat. So RICA aside, the other big thing that's happening is this proposal for cleanup. Here is a picture of a community where a Diné community lives, Redwater Pond Road. They live between 3 abandoned uranium mines. So this one here, United Nuclear Corporation, now owned by General Electric. This is where the uranium came from that was being milled at the UNC mill site that spilled over 90 million gallons of liquid radioactive waste into the environment. And then that got into the Puerco River that then transported it into Arizona at least about 100 miles. None of this was really, making public media except until it was about to reach Las Vegas and then possibly the water resources of Los Angeles. Then it became a national issue. However, just 3 months before this, 3 Mile Island was making huge headlines, but this actually was a larger release of radiation and didn't make that same kind of news and has never been cleaned up. It's never been studied. And so now they're talking about cleaning up the mine site. The mill site, they've, contained it. There's a lot of stuff goes in. There's a lot more. I don't have time to go into it. But right now the proposal is to, and so at the mill, what happened here at the mill, that they were storing their waste over here. And then they had a clay wall that broke on July 16th, 1979. So that waste, they buried it on site and contained it, whatever they could. The rest, they shoveled it up and tried to scoop it up and put it somewhere. So right now what's going on is the community's already gone through several cleanups. They've been dealing with this issue for a long time. And what the proposal is, here are some of the community leaders, Edith Hood, Larry King. Both of them were working at the mill when the spill happened. And they do these community events, but I'm sorry, I gotta go back here. So you can see where their community is and then where the ditch is, where some of the spill happened. And so these are their houses where they live. And so I'm gonna go to show you where they have, that's how their animals were impacted. Right here, if you can imagine again, this is where their houses are. The mine is here, and the proposal is to transport the waste on top of the mill waste. So here, these brown colors here, this is the waste that's already there. And this cross-hatching here, the proposal is to put mine waste on top. So at 1 million cubic yards, which I don't know what the weight is, and I'm not an engineer, but the idea is, a friend of mine talks about the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If you put enough stuff on top, the peanut butter and jelly is going to come out the side. This is not a good proposal. The Navajo Nation is fighting this, but the most egregious part of the proposal is this is only the waste that's kind of like not so radioactive. The more radioactive waste, they plan to truck it to White Mesa Mill. So because there's no place to put uranium waste, if they do this, this will set a precedent of cleaning up one Indigenous community by dumping it on another Indigenous community. So I think that's horrible. And so right now, there's not a lot of threats of new uranium mining because the price of uranium hadn't been profitable for a long time. But uranium happens to occur mostly where there's sacred places. It just so happens like our sacred mountain here. These are some of the proposals in New Mexico. Again, Energy Fuels is one of the culprits. Mount Taylor, this is one of the very sacred places in New Mexico, then the Black Hills. We have the Grand Canyon and just other places around the world that are being threatened because this was the price of uranium in 2006. That's when there was a big push for new mining. And you can see the price has been very down, that's been very far down for a long time. And what they're saying is, there's some studies or calculations out there saying companies cannot make a profit unless uranium is at least about $70 per pound. So right now, this is from last month or earlier this year. It's going up. So as of today, it's over the $50 mark. And I saw something that says it's $63.25 per pound. I don't know what the exact price per pound is now, but it's going up, which means we're going to be at threat again. But our uranium in the United States is not that powerful. So I don't know why they, I don't know. This is just an issue, and it's going to impact Indigenous peoples a lot. Now, I'm going to talk about different kinds of waste. I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to talk about the waste over here, and just to explain why nuclear is not a solution to climate change. What they do when they calculate the carbon footprint of nuclear, they basically count this steam that's coming from the cooling tower, and they say, oh, there's no carbon. So all of the earlier, like I mentioned, the front end processes are not counted, the middle processes, and then the creation of the waste, which will be radioactive, some people say for 1 million years, essentially forever, hundreds of thousands of years. And we have to store this. And it's so radioactive that if you were just, maybe a yard away, a meter away from a handful of this stuff, you would die within an hour. This is how lethal the waste is if you're unshielded. So of course it's in containers, and they try to protect us from these things, but the power plants are getting old, and this stuff has to be contained for hundreds of thousands to millions of years. So just juxtaposing where the uranium is in the country, in the middle, in the West mostly, and then looking at where the power plants are. Now put those two maps together, and you can see where they took out the uranium and then used it for electricity, where people were receiving electricity. You might have noticed I used the picture of Pilgrim generating station. The reason for that is because of Holtec. So we're connected in this way to folks out in Plymouth. I've been there. I visited a lot of these communities. These are all the power plants where there's a lot of decommissioning happening a lot in the Northwest. And then, there's also issues with San Onofre. There's nowhere to put the waste from the power plants right now. There's nowhere in the country, but there's proposals there's 2 places to put it temporary. And the people, we think, so there's one here in Texas and one in New Mexico. And we think this is ridiculous that these are temporary proposals, possibly transporting this very, very dangerous waste across the country twice. So the first time to get to New Mexico or Texas, and then the second time whenever there's a permanent site built. But we think it's possible there will be no permanent site and will become the de facto permanent site. So we're fighting this, our states are fighting this, there's a lot of community fights against this. My concern is that the transport will be by rail, and this rail here goes right by 2 of our sacred mountains. So here's our res, we got our 4 sacred mountains here, and the proposals are down here. So any transport coming from the West, for me, I am concerned about all of the, not just the Indigenous and Navajo communities. I mean, this is national. This is everyone being at risk. But for me as an Indigenous person, my concern is really, you heard very much about the importance of our sacred places in the first 2 presentations. So just imagining we have 2 sacred mountains along the haul routes. And earlier I was talking about the haul route from the mine to the mill, and that's uranium that hasn't been processed yet. This is way, way more radioactive. So yeah, I'm just gonna end my presentation there to say these are all of the issues I'm keeping my eye on, and I work with many, many, many people all over New Mexico. The next slide, before I end, there's another slide about the locations where these 2 proposals are. So one is here in Texas. This facility was already licensed. There's the Holtec site here. Holtec is the company proposing the world's largest nuclear waste storage. They're not licensed yet. They're doing a very bad job with their application. And this is just 14 miles north of the waste isolation pilot plant that just had a radioactive leak in the last few days. Yeah, there's a lot more going on. My next slide shows, if you go on Google and you switch to the satellite view, these are all fracking sites. So this is the Permian Basin, fracking and oil drilling, and then potash mining. So there's a sinkhole in Carlsbad from all of that. So this is not the place to store the most radioactive waste in the world. This is the worst place. It's illegal. There's a lot of issues. I can go into that. There's a lot of resistance. We got local organizing, we got local groups, statewide groups, national groups. Some of my own work I've done is basically radiation monitoring in the communities, traveling internationally. So there's a lot of folks all over the world fighting this stuff. And there's a lot of things folks can do. And I just wanted to share some of those things. And there's a lot of links I can put in the chat. I'm sorry, there's not enough time for Q&A, but I'll put my contact information if folks want to reach out. And I'm a volunteer. I don't get paid for a lot of this. So I also appreciate any donations. And again, I'll put some of that in the chat. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Leona, so much. Yes, please put your, of all the speakers, put links that are helpful for donations, for upcoming speaking or webinars you'll have, or a way to get involved directly on the front lines if you're in any or near any of these places. I just want to reiterate and thank everyone so much for your presentations. Again, the intersectionalities between demilitarize, decarbonize, decolonize, and then within that conversation, how like the things that you all weave together through your presentations and through the work that you're doing is really brilliant. I see the word brilliant a lot coming up in the chat. Yes, we wish there was time for Q&A. I know that I think if we had a Q&A and opened it up, we could be here for a couple of days, which I wouldn't mind, but I want to respect the time of our speakers. And for everyone who is on here, we've had over, like, I think at one point almost 150 folks here listening. I'd love to, we will follow up. I think Brian is collecting information and going to send out links about our weeks of action. I think it's important to hear, learn, unlearn, but then also, if and when we can, bring it to the streets. And there's a lot that we're fighting against, but also to be reminded of what we're fighting for. So we will have an organizing call tomorrow night for folks who are planning actions next week. Please join us again. That chat is coming in here. Also, you can see different a calendar of events that we have next week, but this is by no means like the end of this. We'll have another webinar in May around the militarization of the border that you'll all get a follow-up email of as well, and we will have more chances to get involved. But please follow the folks here. That's in the chat, and then it will also be on the follow-up email. And I just want to I think Mikey, did you have your hand up?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know. Well, first of all, mahalo. Sorry, our presentation went over time. I really do want to hear people's questions and comments and connections and how we can all build together. So I've been hosting with a lot of other folks from all over the world this space. It's kind of like an anti-imperialist, decolonial, socialist space. It's in the chat right here. If you click on it, I'm basically going to start it as soon as this ends. So if anyone is still awake and has time and wants to join us, that would be a great space where we can continue discussions that we've been having here and continue to build here. And mahalo so much to all of you and to Tara and Leona in particular. Learned so much from you and so inspired by all the work that y'all do.
Yes, I love that. Continue the conversation over on Twitter and I'd love to have a round two at another time. So please reach out to myself or the other organizers here about maybe coordinating if you have other folks who would be interested in coming together around this theme, again, online or in person. But I wanted to ask if anything else needs to be said by the War Industries Resistance Network before we sign off.
I'll just say thank you.
Yes, thank you, I think is the sentiment. We'll be following up on the email, but I think like having these conversations, a lot of folks on here are already a lot of experts or came in with a lot of knowledge. So getting out there with folks who might be a little nervous to ask questions because they don't know what's going on, and political education is a really important piece of this all as well. So I think someone just asked, did you miss the Q&A? Unfortunately, we're over time or well beyond time. However, Mikey is going to host a Q&A on Twitter, and Mikey, maybe put that link there again. And Leona?
I just wanted to make one announcement. I think the Redwater Pond Road community is having their annual gathering around July 16th, and they usually invite folks out, to be COVID safe. Just check in. I don't know where they host the information, but you can contact me if you want to make a trip out to New Mexico. Thanks.
Yes. And again, just we're going to update this calendar for next week, but we, are open to promoting the speakers of the webinars that we had, their events in other ways. So we can definitely be in touch. So if you have more of those things, please reach out. And we look forward to seeing most of you on the call tomorrow night, and then being out on the streets all together next week. And from all over. So looking forward to that. Thank you all so much and have a great night. And again, congratulations to Tara on bringing in another beautiful life into this world. So good luck on that journey. Bye, everyone.